I felt like in her mind, she's like, you can't be royal, rich, and hot. Just pick two, you know?
Yeah, how do you get to have all of these? Obviously, like, wants to hate him because of,
Yeah.
like, who he is, but she can't because she's like, oh, you're cute, so... Hi, everybody! Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast. We are two best friends who love all things fantasy. On this podcast, we will explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with an extra heavy emphasis on books.
Today, we will be talking about the book Throne of Glass, chapters 1 through 7. So if you have not read them or finished reading them and you don't want any spoilers, pause here, go and finish them and come back. This will obviously become more relevant as we continue through the series because once we've covered it on the show, we will definitely be referencing it in future episodes. Also, this podcast is R-rated. We are talking about adult books with adult themes. So we'd like to give everyone a fair warning that we will be having explicit conversations with explicit language. So if you have kids around or are at work, please be mindful of that and maybe put on some headphones. So Lorraine and I are so excited to kick off the Throne of Glass series in this episode. But before we get started, there is a little bit of background information you need to know about the series so you can know how we're going to proceed moving forward. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Throne of Glass, like I was when we first started, it is not like other series in that there's a specific order. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was reading Harry Potter. On the spine, it clearly says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Throne of Glass is not like this. Most of the books follow a logical order, but there is some debate in the Throne of Glass community about what order to read the series in. Samantha Grindell from Business Insider wrote a really helpful article explaining the different orders and which to read them and the reasons behind those, which we will link in the show notes just in case you're curious. But I will give you like a little brief synopsis and justification of why we're reading them in the order that we chose. The novel Throne of Glass was published in August 2012, but Sarah J. Maas had already published 4 novellas about Celaena Sardothien, our main character, online before it was released. The publisher released the novellas plus one more story as a book called The Assassin's Blade in March of 2013. So if you want to read them in publishing order, that's how you would do it. However, the events of The Assassin's Blade take place chronologically before those of Throne of Glass, and its plot is crucial for the second half of the series. So if you'd like to read the books chronologically, you would want to start with The Assassin's Blade and then move on. However, Maas intentionally leaves the revelations from The Assassin's Blade out of Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire. So if you read it before the first 3 novels in the series, you'll be exposed to spoilers you otherwise wouldn't be. And so because we love to be emotionally damaged by our fantasy series, we opted for maximum impact and dramatic effect. So we're going to start with Throne of Glass.
So to give everybody a quick overlook, this is what you can expect from today's episode. We will be starting with a quick summary of each of the first 7 chapters. This will be followed by a discussion of a very in-depth analysis of both character-based events and plot-based events, and this includes future predictions and questions we have as well. I have many questions, as I'm sure Addison does too. And then last but not least, we will talk about our favorite moments and other things we like. So without further ado, let's get started.
Chapter 1. After a year of slavery in the salt mines of Endovier, Celaena Sardothien was accustomed to being escorted everywhere in shackles and at sword point. We are introduced to Chaol Westfall, captain of the Royal Guard, as he escorts Celaena Sardothien through the corridors of the building that housed Endovier's officials and overseers. Despite his best attempt to intimidate and disorient Celaena, she was unfazed. That is, until she was led to the throne room where she faced the Crown Prince of Otterlin. Chapter 2. If Celaena Sardothien were bound for the gallows, she would most certainly not spend the last moments of her life in groveling submission, especially not to a member of the Haviliard family. But that didn't sit well with Duke Parrington. He brutally forced her to the floor, but that didn't sit well with Dorian, who ordered Parrington to release Celaena. After dismissing him, Celaena and Dorian and Chaol discussed her impressive escape attempt, and Dorian inspected her physical and mental condition. After determining that she was very much alive and sane, Dorian tells Celaena he has a proposition for her. Chapter 3. Celaena's freedom was on the line. Dorian tells her the king wants an official champion, aka a lackey, to do his dirty work. Selena hated the idea of working for the king that had destroyed her life, but all she had to do was be the king's crooked dagger for 6 years. Then she would be granted her freedom. But there was a catch. 23 other council members would be hosting contestants, and they would all compete against each other for the opportunity to compete in a final duel. If she won, then she'd officially be the king's champion. But if she didn't accept Dorian's offer, then she would be sent back into the mines, which was basically a death sentence. This left Selena with no choice. She accepted Dorian's offer under the condition she would be freed after 4 years instead of 6. After all, she wasn't Otterland's assassin for nothing. Chapter 4. Selena is taken to a bedroom that is a far cry from the horrific conditions of the mines, where she was scrubbed, cleaned, and dressed. Despite the pampering, Selena couldn't help but notice the toll the mines had taken on her physical appearance. The next morning, Kale wakes Selena up to prepare to leave, but she is immediately distracted by the glorious sunlight coming through the window. Selena dresses and prepares to leave the mines, but is stopped by some friendly dogs, and then Dorian Havilyard himself. As Selena rides out of the mines, she can't help but think of all the slaves left behind that would never leave. Even if she was free, others were not. After hours of silence riding through the Oakwald Forest, Selena attempts to strike up a conversation with Kale, but he wasn't having it. Although she was able to pry a few personal details from him, all she really seemed to do was annoy him. Selena's endless string of questions was only interrupted when the party came to a halt, stopping for lunch. Chapter 5. Selena eats her lunch and quietly observes the Oakwald Forest around her. Her thoughts shift to the past when the king of assassins found her at the age of 8, half dead on the banks of a frozen river, and offered her her only chance at survival. Her reflection on her past was interrupted when one of the soldiers begins to insult the forest. Selena couldn't hold her tongue and told the soldiers to watch their tongues when speaking about King Brandon's forest. She then remembers what it was like when the king of Otterland outlawed magic, and she could still smell the fires that had raged, burning books and storefronts, sacred places, and even worse, people gifted with magic. They stopped for the night, and when she woke, she found small white flowers laid at the foot of her cot and tiny footprints that led in and out of her tent. Her racing heart did not slow, and she kept a continual eye on the forest as they passed. Chapter 6. The next 2 weeks of travel were somewhat miserable. Selena could bear sodden hair, but she could not withstand the agony of wet shoes. They made it to the outskirts of Rifthold, and Dorian invited Kale and by proxy Selena to observe the glass castle. It was gargantuan, both beautiful and monstrous to behold. In a moment of vulnerability, Selena opens up to Kale and tells him about the abhorrent conditions of the mines and the torture she was subjected to. That night, Selena had a reoccurring nightmare where she was buried alive in a mass grave at Endovier. She screamed and screamed, but no one heard her. To soothe her troubled mind, Selena gazed at the stars and resolved that she would win. She would become the king's champion, and then she would disappear. As Selena watched the stars, Dorian watched her. There was something about her, so lovely and yet lethal. He reminded himself of who she was and why they were there, and he tried to sleep. But he could not find sleep. The image haunted his dreams throughout the night. A lovely girl gazing at the stars, and the stars who gazed back. Chapter 7. The party makes their way through the city streets, and Selena almost enjoys her time playing along as a fine, highborn lady until they approach the docks and she sees the broken and desperate faces of the slaves. After arriving at the castle, Kale shows Selena her rooms where she takes care to note the exits, the guards, and possible escape routes. She falls asleep on an overly large and soft bed, but is awakened when a servant announces the arrival of a tailor to outfit her. After being fitted and then meticulously cleaned and pampered, she is introduced to Philippa Spindlehead. What a name! Who is assigned as her personal servant. Selena wondered why they sent such a soft woman to serve her, but she soon found Philippa was in fact not a pushover and was not scared in the slightest of Selena, despite her occupation. We then switch to Dorian's perspective as he speaks with his father, the King of Otterland, about his candidate. He tries to convince him the competition is unnecessary given Selena's reputation, but to no avail. He then argues with his father about his war plans, which went very poorly for Dorian. The king gives Dorian a final warning about staying away from Selena and then backhands him. Knowing he'd only cause himself more trouble if he stayed, Dorian bowed his head and left his father. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into our observations from Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, we are immediately transported to the salt mines of Endovier. We learn that this is a horrible place. You do not want to go there. It is used as a form of punishment for the greatest criminals, poorest citizens, and latest conquest. This is where our main character, Selena Sardathian, is sentenced after her trial approximately a year ago. And we learned during these chapters that it is particularly impressive that Selena has survived for a year because the average lifespan of a prisoner in the salt mines is only a month. This further shows that Selena Sardathian is a badass.
The whole thing about the mines is just so crazy because, oh my gosh, when they mentioned like the pits of bodies that are dead in there, it's so disgusting to think about. I think the descriptions of them really point to how cruel the king of Otterland is. Also, what's the point of having this prison if they're just going to ultimately die? You know what I mean?
So we learn in this set of chapters that the mind is a form of punishment. It's extremely cruel. And we also learn that this is a huge source of income for the king of Otterland.
I missed that detail. Where did they say that?
So in the first chapter, Duke Parrington is there to go and meet with the treasurer of Endovier. And Selena makes a comment about the opulence of the throne room off of her own labor. And so I think it's heavily implied, if not necessarily directly stated, that this is a big source of income for the kingdom. And that's probably
Oh.
also why they use it as a form of punishment, because it's really backbreaking work and that they need people to mine it to make money for the king of Otterland. So it's kind of a win-win for the king. He gets to punish people and make a bunch of money.
Oh, that's true.
In this chapter, we also learn that the treatment of Selena is exceptionally cruel. And this is in large part due to the fact that she is Otterland's most notorious assassin. Through her interactions with Kale Westfall, who is the captain of the Royal Guard, we see that she's very observant and calculating, to the point that Kale Westfall is like leading her around, and it's obvious he's trying to confuse and disorient her. But she even says something like, all that did was teach her the building and how to get out if she wanted to. And so I think that's very telling of her character, that she is just very calm, collected. She's not easily shaken, and that they take her as a threat so seriously. In the chapter, it says that there's an extra half dozen guards whenever she's being escorted anywhere, and that Kale Westfall is wearing all black and has a hood. And all of this is a form of intimidation to instill fear in Selena and control her. But in reality, she even kind of scoffs at this attempt to confuse and disorient her. And she almost finds it insulting, but a little bit, nice because they're trying so hard.
I think it was a little too risky for her to try to escape at that particular time, right?
I think so, yeah. I think it becomes very apparent to her, given her condition after being in the mines for a year, as she's obviously not in peak physical condition. And additionally, the captain of the guard, probably a formidable opponent. And not to mention, she's in shackles, and there are also like dozens of other guards throughout the building. So I also think Selena is curious in this chapter, and she wants to know why she is being led here. This is not a normal occurrence for her by any means. And so I think a part of her is hoping, honestly, given what we learn later in the chapters, I think maybe she's hoping that they're going to execute her, and or that maybe her curiosity got the best of her.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the mental toll it took on her, which is such a contrast to the fact that she's, in most other conversations and details that we learn about her, she's very sassy, she's very self-confident. But the time that she spent in the mines really took a toll. Like, for example, someday she wondered if they would have been better off dying at the butchering blocks instead. And
Yes.
she just has a lot of references to the idea of it being a good thing if she had died because she was just so overworked and malnourished.
Beaten down.
Yeah. So I do think
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
an interesting contrast as far as like what the impact of being in those mines was like.
I think on the way to the throne room, because again, she doesn't know where she's going or why she's being led by this mysterious hooded man. She repeats to herself, I will not be afraid. And I think that's going to be something we're going to see continue throughout the book as her mantra. And I think it's obvious this is the first time that really she's allowed herself to feel fear. I think she's mostly been in survival mode, just sort of shut down and just really just trying to make it day by day. Also thought there are two more interesting one-liners that I think are going to become really important as we continue throughout the book. The first is that the kingdom used to have magic, but either it's forbidden, it doesn't exist, or maybe both. So I'm definitely interested to find out more about what happened to magic. What was the magic like? What were the capabilities? Did everyone have it? And so I think that's going to be huge, if not in this book, but in future books in the series.
Mm-hmm.
So something else I think is important to note in this chapter is that Selena mentions that a lot of the incoming people into the mines of Endovier are from Ilway, which is the last of the countries still fighting for independence. So what that tells me is that the King of Otterland has, for a unknown period of time, has been going country by country or territory by territory and taking over the entire continent. And so I think that's going to come into play later, and that maybe Ilway is going to become an ally. Maybe Selena will escape there. I feel like that it opens up a lot of possibilities for this book and also for future in the series.
Yeah, I was wondering because we know that the King of Otterland is against magic. Maybe not
Hmm.
quite in this chapter, but we definitely learn later on. And that's a big reason for why he is trying to get rid of it. So I'm wondering if, in a way, maybe they have a strong presence of magic and maybe that's how they've been able to fend them off for so long.
That's possible. I don't know. We'll have to keep reading.
So one of the big symbolic things from this chapter was the description of the royal seal and how it has a gold wyvern on it. I can't help but think, why would you have a wyvern, which is a magical creature, if your king fundamentally opposes magic? It's like a magical creature and a magical being. And so for me, I've been sitting here wondering, the king, he's trying to take over all of these other countries, several of which had magic, from what we learned later on. But I'm like, how did you do that unless you had magic yourself? Because there's no logical reason for how, I'm presuming he's a human. He has to be just a normal human as far as we know. So how would it
Yeah.
be possible for a normal human king to overtake all of these other countries as rapidly as he did without the assistance of something magical?
True. Maybe it's more just brute force. I don't know. That's definitely going to be something to look out for in future chapters.
So for chapter 2, first off, I think this is where you start to get a little bit of some flirtatious tension between the characters. So for one, Selena describes Captain Westphal. She says, but she couldn't help finding the ruggedness of his face and the clarity of his golden brown eyes rather appealing. So I think
I
it's
have
funny
a
that
crush on Kale. I do. I'm just telling you right now, in the chapters I've read, I have a crush on him.
then later on, she also says, now after she meets Dorian, then she's like, yet there was something in his eyes, strikingly blue, the color of the waters of the southern countries, and the way they contrasted with his raven black hair that made her pause. He was achingly handsome and couldn't have been older than 20. And then
I
she
love this.
says, princes are
Um,
not supposed to be handsome. They're sniveling, stupid, repulsive creatures. How unfair of him to be royal and beautiful.
yes, I love that part. I felt like in her mind, she's like, you can't be royal, rich, and hot. Just pick two, you
Yeah,
know?
how do you get to have all of these? She
Yeah.
obviously, like, wants to hate him because of, like,
Yeah.
who he is, but she can't because she's like, "Oh, you're cute." So, never
Honestly,
mind.
that's how I kind of felt about him in these chapters too. I felt like I shouldn't like him, but there was something about him that was just very charming. And I feel like there's lots of these subtle hints and reading between the lines where you can tell that I think he's a good guy. For example, in the last chapter, when he has a conversation with the king, which we'll talk more in a little bit, he says, if I were king, I wouldn't be trying to force my way into the territory of Terrasen and kill off the royal family. And I think that's indicative that he is very different from his father. We know that the king is very cruel and ambitious and is responsible for the death of many, many, many peoples and cultures. I think that's a big reason why they don't get along. And I think we're going to continue to see that friction as we continue to read.
Right, and one of the notable things from chapter 2, at least, was his defense of her with freaking Duke Parrington. What is
Oh,
going on with that
yeah.
man? How he was like, "You need to bow down to him," and then he chokes her, and I was like, "Excuse me?" I feel like later on there's gonna be something that comes up with him just because I just feel like it's never a good sign when characters lash out like that in aggressive manners, but I
Yeah.
did really appreciate that the prince stopped him. So I thought that was also a pretty major first hint into his character aspects that, oh, you may
Mhm.
be the son of this really tyrannical king, but you're clearly very different from him.
I think you're right about Duke Parrington because if you recall later in the set of chapters, he's mentioned again twice. And the first is Selena is observing a conversation between him and Dorian. And she says she can tell by based on their body language that their relationship is anything but cordial. And then later at the end of chapter 7, when Dorian is having a conversation with his father, we learn that the king basically had Duke Parrington go along to spy and report on Dorian's doings. And so Duke Parrington is definitely a king's guy and not a prince guy. And so I think
Mhm.
that you're correct that he's going to continue to show up in future chapters. And it's going to be in the capacity of spying and reporting the goings-ons to the king. I don't think we're going to see any kind of character arc redemption or anything for him. I think he's a bad dude. And I think he doesn't like Selena.
Big brute.
A big brute. Just a big brute.
brute. Yeah,
Big
I don't
brute.
like him at all. So the other two things that stuck out to me in this chapter was number one, we learn that she had been trained as an assassin since the age of 8 by someone who they call the king of assassins himself. I think the circumstances under which she was found are kind of sketch too, because she's found half dead on the banks of a frozen river, and he brings her to his keep. And I'm like, how did she end up on this river? What was she running from? And then also the king of assassins himself, like, is he still alive? How did he get to be the king of assassins or get that title, you know?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions about this as well. My first thought too was he responsible perhaps for her capture? And why is he not come to rescue her? Was there a falling out? I had a lot of questions about that too.
Selena herself is considered one of the greatest assassins now. Does that mean she's surpassed him? And is she better than him? You know,
Ooh. Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I have other
absolutely.
questions about that, but I think we'll learn more about that later. The other notable event was that after being in the mines for 4 months, she made an escape attempt. But what was really significant about that is that generally anyone who tried to escape doesn't make it more than 3 feet, is what they say in the book.
Yep.
Meaning the guards and the security around there are trained to kill immediately as soon as people make it. But she almost made it to the wall, and she took out 23 sentries during that time too. So number one, essentially was a suicide mission. She knew going in that her trying to escape was likely going to result in her dying. So I think that speaks a lot to her personal mental state at that point in time. But then the other thing that's interesting is the fact that none of the guards or anybody actually killed her. They let her make it all the way over there just to all of a sudden, they do catch her at the end and bring her back, but she's kept alive.
I had that in my notes too. I wrote, the king must really hate her because the king ordered them to keep her alive as long as possible so she could continue to suffer in the mines. And so again, I think that points to the brutality of the king, the brutality of the mines, and also points to that Selena is incredibly capable. And I think the exact words, she was a fingertips from the wall. I like the part where she's talking to Kael and the Praetorian, and she said, ask me how far the wall is from my mine shaft. It's 326 feet. I had someone measure. I like that because it's so cocky, right? She wants him to know that she made it. I do want to know more about her escape attempt because she seems so capable and so brave and highly trained. Did she purposefully not make it? Like, was she hoping to be killed? Or I guess what were the circumstances surrounding her escape attempt? So in this next chapter, after Kael Westfall has escorted Selena Sardathian to the throne room, we get more in depth of a conversation between Prince Dorian Havliard and Selena. We learn that the King of Otterlin needs a champion, like an official assassin, and that he thought he would have a bit of fun with it and host a competition. It gives very strong Hunger Game vibes. Basically, all these lords and ladies and council members will pick their champion, throw him into the ring, and let him have at it. In this chapter, we learn more about what Prince Dorian wants from Selena Sardathian. It is revealed that the King of Otterlin needs a champion. So through negotiation, initially Dorian says that if she wins, she will be the assassin for 6 years, and then she will be granted her freedom. Selena is a shrewd negotiator and negotiates down to 4 years. And Dorian personally promises her that he will see to her release earlier than the 6 years originally offered. If she says no, she will be sent back to Endovier. So I feel like Selena's kind of put in a no-win situation here. She really doesn't have a choice. We've already discussed how the condition of the mines is absolutely abhorrent, and she almost didn't make it this first year. And so it's unlikely that she would continue to survive much longer past this point. Another big thing that I thought was super notable from this conversation in this chapter was that Dorian tells her that she will not be competing under her actual name, Selena Sardathian. And he says something to the effect of, oh, I guess you didn't hear what happened after your trial. And that no one has any idea that she's actually just an 18-year-old girl. And at the time of her trial, she was 17. And I thought this was so interesting because it really made me wonder, What were the circumstances of her capture and her trial? How did they keep that a secret? I mean, how did no one basically know that she was a 17-year-old girl? And also, it makes me really want to know what happened after her trial. So, for whatever reason, I have it in my mind that part of maybe Selena's capture had to do with her switching sides. Like, initially, maybe she would just kind of assassinate anyone. And then over time, she started to do more political targets that were not in favor of the King of Otterland. And maybe that's what prompted her capture. But she sort of became the people's assassin, like the champion for the people. The people that she was assassinating maybe were slave overlords or people who were exceptionally cruel or like military targets. I don't know. My mind kind of went all over the place here, but it did make me wonder what could have been so notable post her trial.
I feel like there's a point where she's looking at the merchant ships in chapter 6, I think, when they get to the city, and she remembers that time when she had freed a bunch of slaves. So I'm kind of wondering, when you put it that way, if maybe she's, like you said, switch sides, or if what she wanted to do became different from
Yeah, like her
who
agenda.
she was assassinating for wanted her to do.
I think it's very possible that when more of her background and history is revealed, we'll see that she was just an assassin for hire and didn't care who she killed. And then as time progresses, she develops more of a conscience and maybe starts being more selective with her targets and causing trouble, so to speak.
So one other point about Selena being a champion, specifically it's Dorian who recruits her, and she's supposed to be a champion on his behalf in this tournament. And at one
Mhm.
point in the book, it says, though he tried to conceal it, she could see the tension in his body. He wanted her to say yes, needed her to say yes so badly he was willing to bargain with her. So to me, that's raising questions about, is there something else in it for Dorian if she wins?
I think that's something we've already talked about, that his character is very multifaceted. He is more than he appears. He's not just a princeling. He's not just a pretty face. And there's clearly tension between him and his father because they have different views of how the kingdom should be run. And I wonder if Selena is going to be a tool that he uses to sort of manipulate and maneuver his father and sort of align with Dorian's goals. So that's a really good point. And I'm definitely curious to see how that plays out.
So going into chapter 4, we do get some details, a little bit more information about Selena. And I think it speaks to just how young she still really is. We get some details about how she really likes the clothes and the fancy, intricate attire and the feasting and daydreaming. Even though she's supposed to be like this very deadly assassin, it's like at the end of the day, she's also still 18 and she's
Yeah.
very young. And so she just has these interests still that are very youthful. And so that's some interesting information just about her as a character and her maturity overall as it currently stands. Something else that was pretty notable in this chapter is just the contrast between Selena's current state. So now that she is not being rescued, that's kind of the wrong term, but now she's being removed from the mines, and how we still get descriptions and insights into the poor conditions of the mine while she was still a slave. So, for example, the fact that she sleeps on the floor instead of in the bed, and how she runs to the windows to bask in the sunlight. Then, even as she's appreciating this newfound access to these little things, she's still noticing how, oh, I'm in here and all the other slaves are working now. They're back out there in the mines again. She definitely feels for the slaves to know that I may be getting out of this situation currently and have this opportunity, but there's still all of these other people left in this prison that are obviously going to suffer. The last notable piece of information, character-wise, was about Kale. We learn that during this time, he's currently 22 years old, and he was 20 when he became captain of the guard, which seems suspiciously young and also very fast. That's like a pretty quick rise through the ranks. So it's kind of like, how did you get to that position so quickly? That's something I would like to definitely keep an eye out for and learn about later. We also get some information about his family. We learn that his family is from royalty somewhat and includes the title of a lord. However, Kale himself, he does not actually hold the title. And it seems like the reasons for that are somewhat scandalous based off of the language that they use. Or maybe that scandal caused him to go into the guard, maybe?
The thing that pops into my head is if he's getting promoted to captain of the guard, he has to be really skilled in combat with weapons, etc. Because the royal guard are the soldiers who are trained basically from birth to protect the royal family. So it makes me wonder what his relationship with Dorian is and his overall skills, weapon-wise, etc. I do wonder if something happened mysterious or scandalous and that he had to give up his title of the Lord and to save face with the family he's assigned to the royal guard. I don't know. I definitely think that's something that we'll probably find out, I think, in the relative future. But it's something to look out for sure.
I do think that Dorian and him have a closer relationship than what is led to be believed from what we know so far. They don't give a ton of information about it, but for example, when they're traveling through the forest and they get to the outskirts of the city, there's that point where he calls Kale over specifically to go look at how
Look at the
beautiful
castle.
the city is off in the distance. Yeah, and I just feel like that was a very friendly thing to do, and it's not something he did with the other guards.
That's
Like it
true.
was really only Kale. Maybe his relationship to Dorian is the reason that he got promoted so quickly, too. Like
Possible.
that, maybe that's an alternative theory is like, oh,
Yeah.
they already knew each other. Dorian got him in somehow.
Yeah. Very
So
possible.
the last thing that I wanted to mention really quick was the dogs. 2 different times, the dogs really seem to like Selena, and Dorian makes a comment about how they typically don't like strangers. Maybe it's not significant, but animals know. They can tell, right?
They do. Yeah. Well, and I think Dory even asked her, did you give them food? Because he's just really surprised that they would even approach her. And so he thought that maybe
Yeah.
she bribed them in some way. So I think that's very possible. At fair minimum, it's indicative of her character and the dogs can sense that she's a good person.
Yeah, they like her. So
They do. All right. So in this next chapter, we get a huge world building download about the history of the continent. I'm really excited about this because I love magic. I'm a fiend. I just want more and more and more. So even though this is probably a small glimpse of what we'll get, it's really the first insight we get that there is a world beyond just non-magical reality. We also find out a little bit about the King of Assassins. So earlier, Selena mentions that she was found at 8 years old by the King of the Assassins and taken to his keep and trained. We learned that the King of the Assassins' name is Arabin Hamel, that his keep is on the border between Otterland and Terrasen. And he is not kind because Selena even mentions that had she not agreed to be trained, that he would have handed her over to be murdered or worse. And we're talking about an 8-year-old child. So, I think it's safe to assume the King of Assassins was not a nice person, despite him sort of saving her. So, I'm definitely interested to learn more about that. In this chapter, they're on their way to Rifthold, which is where the glass castle is and where the king's, I guess I would call it the capital of Otterland. They decide to camp inside the Oakwalled forest, and there's a conversation between Selena Kale and some of the soldiers. And the soldiers seem to have very negative feelings about the forest and its history. And Selena talks about the forest with a lot of reverence and respect. She tells us that this is King Brannon's forest. And we learned that King Brannon reigned over 2,000 years ago and that he was High Fae and he was the king of the High Fae and that this is where he resided. We also learned that High Fae were the original inhabitants of the continent and were there before humans or any other creatures, and that they disappeared when the King of Otterland outlawed magic. He outlawed fairies, fae, anything having to do with magic. Through this conversation and Selena's thoughts, we also learned that Selena has remnants of magic in her blood, and she talks a little bit about how she has very distant memories of her powers and that it still gives her nightmares. But as far as we know, either she's not able to tap into those powers for whatever reason, or maybe they're not activated. We really don't know a lot about what happened to magic and why it's not used. We know it's outlawed, but we really don't know about the origins or the inner workings of magic in this universe. Hopefully, we'll find out more about that later. The last important thing I think that is notable here is that when Selena wakes up in the morning, she finds little white flowers at the foot of her cot and little tiny footprints. And so immediately I'm like, oh, it's either smaller fairies or sprites, but it's some sort of magical being that leads us for Selena. And I think it is a gift or an acknowledgement of the reverence in which she spoke of King Brandon's forest.
Other things that I wanted to say was about the Fae disappearing when Otterlin outlawed it. Within a month of his proclamation, magic had completely and utterly disappeared of its own accord. That makes me curious because I'm like, what was going on before Otterlin that would have caused them to flee? But it also seems like maybe they are still there though, because for one, she describes the forest, the leaves dangled like jewels. So I think it's still kind of there, and the fact that what we're presuming to be our fairies had left these little flowers by her cot. And so I feel like they're there. And the other thing that I wanted to say about Selena's magic point, it said that it was far too dangerous for any sane person to wield. Her gifts might have destroyed her by this point. I'm curious about what were these abilities? Why did she lose them? So in chapter 6, we have another quick little instance of Selena thinking about Dorian again, and vice versa as well. So you can tell that they're definitely crushing on each other a little bit there. I hope something happens, but that's wishful thinking, I guess.
I'm just desperate for romance. I'm just like, where's the romance?
It's a slow burn in this one. So another notable instance is that this is the first time that we actually get descriptions of the glass castle. They describe it as it was gargantuan, a vertical city of shimmering crystalline towers and bridges, chambers and turrets, domed ballrooms, and long, endless hallways. It had been built above the original stone castle and cost a kingdom's wealth to construct. So obviously this thing is massive. I still have suspicions about this castle. I just can't believe that humans constructed this thing.
Well, I think they call out that magic had to be used to construct it. There's no way.
I don't know if they said anything specifically about it. The only piece of evidence that I found later was this description where it says the illuminated castle rose from the sleeping city like a mound of ice and steam. There was something greenish about it and it seemed to pulse. That to me was kind of, I don't know, it sounds magic-y to me. Something's going on with this castle.
I was going to say, it's a castle made of glass. Like, if that doesn't scream magic, I don't know what does.
Exactly. We also get a little more background information about Selena's past. She remembers the first time that she'd seen it 8 years prior. That was also the time where she supposedly killed a man. If you think about that, she was 10. 10 years old when she killed a full-grown man. So you're like,
When you say it like that, it sounds really creepy. Honestly, just creepy.
She's been through a lot. Like, that's traumatizing. Anyways, as she reflects about that, Selena and Kale also have another conversation where he asks her how she was actually captured. They dive into that story a little bit, and Selena ends up telling him that she believes it was somebody that she knew. She says, and the one that seemed most likely was a truth she wasn't ready to face. Not now, not ever. This insinuates that this person that betrayed her was obviously someone very close to her.
I had two different thoughts about that. My first thought was, one was that Arabin, her quote-unquote father figure. My thought was maybe she became too successful and he got jealous and so he got her captured. Or perhaps it was a lover, like another assassin that was a lover, and there was some jealousy or something going on there. But I definitely was very intrigued by that. I feel that Selena probably has a pretty good idea of who it is. And it had to be someone close to her for her to say she wasn't ready to face it. Not now, not ever. The betrayal had to be so personal and so deep that it was just too unbearable for her to face.
I agree that Arabin's definitely somebody who seems to be a good match. There's a lot of question marks around Arabin in general. I wouldn't be surprised if it was him. Moving on, we also learn information about just how cruel the conditions were in the mines. Previously, they'd mentioned 3 big scars that Selena has on her back. And this time we finally know exactly why she got them. So it turns out she was whipped, and on top of that, they would rub salt into her wounds, and so they never really healed properly. It makes my skin crawl to think about that. Imagine how painful that would be.
I think it speaks to her toughness that she was able to survive that.
Maybe that was like the insinuating event that led her to want to try to escape that one time. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe that was like kind of a breaking point for her, but we never really get more information than that. I guess to speak more about the conditions of it, so Selena still has nightmares And this seems to be a recurring nightmare. So it says, and when she tried to pull herself from the tangle of rotting limbs, she'd been dragged down into a pile 20 bodies deep. And then no one noticed that she was still screaming when they buried her alive. To me, that's an indication that it really haunts her. So I almost wonder if this is a combination of both the trauma that she has from being in the mines, but also this overarching fear of now that she's free, quote unquote, again. Well, as soon as she wins, she'll be able to earn her freedom back. But I think as long as she stays in this position as an assassin, she's always going to be kind of at the mercy of other people. She's still under work orders. So as soon as she does something wrong, they could quickly just throw her back into the mines again. So she's never really free until she either escapes and hides out forever or until she's not an assassin any longer. But I mean, obviously for this current book, she is still an assassin working.
So in this last chapter that we're covering for this episode, I feel like we get a couple of really interesting interactions. First and foremost is that we get a little bit more insight into Selena's character, and this is a common theme through the first several chapters, and I have a feeling will continue as we read. Selena is deeply empathetic and deeply affected and disturbed by what she sees when she arrives into Rifthold. They're walking on horses all along the dock. She sees slaves on the dock, and she just is really bothered and horrified by this. And this is a comment she makes throughout, that her memories of her times in Endovier, and then also just her mind will be taken back and she thinks about, well, she's free, the people she left behind are not. And I have a feeling that this is going to be a moral principle that guides her throughout the rest of her journey. I also think it's notable that Selena is extremely resourceful. When she's shown to her room, it's obvious that Kaol or other guards have totally cleared it of any potential weapons. And she is literally able to make a weapon out of some hairpins and some string. It's not a perfect weapon, but girls got to do what a girl's got to do. And so I think this is going to be a common theme throughout, that she is just resourceful as hell and that she is going to make it work, whatever she needs to do. We also see her get pampered and cleaned up. And I just kind of like this, like you talked about earlier, how she's still very young. I mean, she's 18 years old. She still loves clothes and she likes to flirt. I mean, she's still literally a teenager, which is wild to think about, given all that she's been through and seen. Also, in this chapter, we also meet Philippa. That is Selena's personal servant, and she's kind of spicy. And
I like her.
I like her. I like that she's not intimidated by Selena, even though she knows who she is. And I kind of like that she tries to put Selena in her place, because sometimes she can be kind of unnecessarily rude. And so I like that Philippa tells her, no, you're not going to treat me like that.
I feel like Philippa knows some shit. She's probably got some deep info on everything going on. She strikes me as one of those like white old women. She knows information. She just hasn't told her yet.
The next thing that I thought was so interesting and so exciting, as soon as I read it, I was like, this is going to be a thing. So I'm just going to call it out now. So when it happens, I can say a big pull, I told you so. Even if you agree with me, I don't care. I still want to say
yeah, what if I agree?
I don't care. I still am just like, to whoever disagrees, I told you so. In the conversation Dorian has with his father, the king, Dorian, in his inner monologue, comments that he looks nothing like his father and not even really like his mother. Specifically calls out his sapphire blue eyes and that nobody knows where he got them from. So immediately I'm like, either the king and his daddy or his mom and his real mother. I don't know why. I just feel very honed in on this. There's something to this. And it makes sense given the conversation we've seen. The king is pretty much openly hostile to Dorian. And I wonder if it's because the king knows that that's not really his son.
Oh.
I don't know why, but that thought is just like glaring alarm bells in my mind. And
the king, he keeps making those comments about need to marry somebody proper, like no illegitimate sons or like anything like that, basically, too.
Yes, this is a huge thing for him. Yes. He's like, you'll understand when you're king, and I'm not going to have some poor peasant girl crying about illegitimate sons. That's a great call up. I don't know why, but I'm just like, this is the hill I'm going to die on. In addition to that, which I made a much bigger deal probably than it is very clear that Dorian and his father do not get along at all. And in fact, Dorian even says part of why he sought out Selena to be his champion was to get away from his father as long as possible. I find it very funny that the king does not approve of Dorian's flirtations. He is not happy about that and even goes so far as to imply that Dorian wants to have a relationship with Selena and that if he does so, there will be severe consequences for everyone around. Besides the personal disagreements they have, I think it's also extremely notable that Dorian does not agree with his father's, I guess, political vision for Otterlin. He specifically calls out that he would not try to declare control for Terrasen through claims of inheritance. And then he also goes so far as to even insult his father's inability to maneuver around the navy of Gwendolyn. And so I think these are both really strong jabs at his father. I would imagine if I was a queen and the heir to the throne was just outright hostile about my plans, probably not a great sign.
Something else that I thought was interesting. Did you notice the part where he said, you mentioned that perhaps you should consider our difficulty in getting past Wenlin's naval defense to be a sign that you should stop playing at being a god. And then the king says, playing? And then he smiles.
Oh, I did not pick up on that. Oh, I did not.
Yeah, he literally responds with like, why are you saying that I'm playing? This just points to my theory that I think there's definitely something going on with the king. He has access to something that we don't know about, but is clearly giving him an advantage in
An
some
edge.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if that means he's a god or if it's magic or like the wyverns or whatever it is, but there's something going on with this man that makes me suspicious of him. Oh, and then my theory. So just like you are going to die on your horse and be convinced that Dorian is not the son of the king or his mother is not his mother or whatever it is. This is my theory. In this chapter, the king says, though she may look pleasant, she's still a witch. You are to keep your distance. Understood? Who? The assassin? She's dangerous, boy. Even if you're sponsoring her, she wants one thing and one thing only. Don't think she won't use you to get it. I know when you read that, you had said, I don't know if the witch term really means a whole lot, but in the context of the other things that I had talked about previously, just the fact that she could once wield magic and she had these special gifts and the king calls her a witch. And I just get this feeling that maybe, I don't know, maybe she's a witch. On page 25, they said, by mid-morning, they were within Oakwald Forest, the wood that surrounded Endovier and served as a continental divide between the civilized countries of the east and the uncharted lands of the west. Legends were still told of the strange and deadly people who dwelt there, the cruel and bloodthirsty descendants of the fallen witch kingdom. And we learned that the king plans, as soon as he defeats Gwendolyn and gets basically like the rest of the control of the southeastern side of the continent, he's going to move his conquests westward. And when we were looking at the map, the witch's kingdom is in the west side. I think that Selena's the witch. But there's just all these little things about these magical gifts and abilities and this reference to her. Whether it was just name calling or not, I feel like there's evidence to support that Selena has witchcrafting abilities. Or maybe she's a witch.
I don't know. I think at this point, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. I reserve the right to change my mind. I mean, obviously, we know she has powers, right? She has mentioned that she has remnants of powers. But I don't know. I feel like the Witch Kingdom may come up later, but not in the context of Selena is from there or as an actual witch. But I don't know. I will disagree for now, but under the pretense that I can change my mind when we get more information.
We'll just keep a little running list of our theories.
Oh, good idea. Namely, the king is not Dorian's real dad. I'm
there's
sorry.
No
it's
freaking
true.
way. Well, that concludes our analysis portion. Hopefully everybody found some interesting insights. If you guys have other things that you would like to share or that you found notable, you can definitely leave it in the comments or send us an email. I'm definitely curious to see what other people think about this too. So, and we'll see if we're right later on about some of our hunches and suspicions.
Mostly, I just want to read in the comments that everyone agrees that the king is not Dorian's real father.
Yeah, everyone's going to be like, yeah, no shit. That was pretty obvious. And we're going to be like, oh, okay.
Well, then good. I'll find it very validating.
The last portion of our episode is going to leave off with a quick section about our favorite moments, our favorite quotes or events. So, Addison, what are yours?
I really liked, I think I referenced this earlier. I like Selena's mantra where she says, I will not be afraid. I find that very empowering. I love in the beginning of the chapters when she first meets Dorian and Selena refuses to bow to Dorian. And in her inner monologue, she says, bow to him indeed. If she were bound for the gallows, she would most certainly not spend the last moments of her life in groveling submission. I just love that she's just so almost recklessly fearless. She's
Mhm.
literally could potentially be murdered. She's staring at the crown prince of Otterlin and she still refuses to bow. I just really like that. And then this is my absolute favorite part. I thought it was so funny. I read it a couple times and I laughed every time. It's where Selena is talking to Philippa and they're talking about Prince Dorian, His Highness. And she makes a comment about, oh, another of his ladies. And Philippa says, he has a big heart, His Highness. And I just thought that was an interesting way of saying that he is a ladies' man. And I thought that was like, oh, he has a big heart. Interesting.
A
So I
big
thought that was
heart
pretty funny.
indeed.
Yeah.
True.
What were some of your favorite moments from this set of chapters?
I just thought some of the more interesting events was like just the fairies leaving the flowers next to her cot. I don't know why that part stuck out to me so much. I just felt like it was a moment of them showing support for Selena and acknowledging that things are not how they're supposed to be, but we're still here. And eventually, in time, there's something coming. It was kind of like almost a good omen in some ways to me. Well, I didn't have anything specific quote wise, but I just thought the banter was funny and just like most of her witty remarks and just her sass. Just fun to listen to the dialogue and stuff. And you can just tell in the way that she speaks and the way that her character is written, you can tell she's a teenager. You know, she has that teenage like arrogance.
I know everything.
Yeah, I know everything and you're wrong, I'm right. And then that last part, there's something about that quote at the end when Dorian is watching Selena and he says, still the image haunted his dreams throughout the night, a lovely girl gazing at the stars and the stars who gazed back.
Oh, yeah, that's a very sweet moment.
It is sweet. I think it's going to allude to something. I feel like it's making a reference to something to come. It's haunting. You wouldn't say, if it was just a nice little observation, I don't think you would word it with the word of haunting.
Quite like that.
As in it's
Yeah.
something, yeah. It feels a little ominous, but I still liked it. So that concludes our very first episode on the Throne of Glass series. Thank you all so much for joining us. It has truly been so much fun for us, and we hope that everybody else enjoys them too. Please feel free to reach out. You can find us on social media. You can send us an email. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode and you want to see some more content from us, please give us a like, give us a share, subscribe to this podcast so you can stay up to date with all of our future episodes. You can find us on all forms of social media, which you can find all the links for that in the description below. That is all that we have for you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
She made an escape attempt. An escape attempt. An escape attempt. I don't know why I can't speak.
If Selena Sardathian were bound for the gallows, if Selena Sardathian, okay. Thank you for those awesome summaries, Elaine.
Elaine.
You can tell I've been reading Court of Silver Flames.